Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Wednesday, February 19th, 2025. It's a little bit after 9 o'clock in the morning. We're continuing our tour of the FY26 budget. And this morning, we're delighted to have the Agency of Natural Resources and their various departments. So we're excited to have you here. And as Secretary Moore, I know you've been in here, but we have your team. So I think we'll just do one round of introductions now so we don't have to do it 4 times when all the rest of you show up. So anyway, welcome to all of you. And Dave, why don't you start?
Good morning, Dave Iacoboni from Morrisville, and I represent the Lamoille, Washington District. Welcome.
Good morning and welcome. John Kosetska from Burke, and I represent the Essex Caledonia District.
Hi, Mike Nigro, I represent the Bennington and
Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury and Huntington, and I am Jim Harrison from Britain. Just wondering if A&R is going to have a respectable team together for the March Madness coming up.
Of course.
Okay.
Heard it live. Okay. Robin Scheid from Middlebury.
Sid Blumley from Burlington.
Trevor Squirrel, Underhill and Jericho.
Wayne Rush, Highgate, Franklin, Berkshire, and Richford.
Mike Murwicky, he's from Putney. Lynn Dickinson, I represent St. Albans Town.
And as you all know, Trevor is your liaison for the whole department, the whole agency. So
Yes.
great.
Thank you for having us this morning. For the record, I'm Julie Moore. I'm the Secretary of Natural Resources, and I'm joined by Steve Gomez, who's the agency's Chief Financial Officer. We also have representatives from each of our 3 departments, but we'll have them introduce themselves as they come up to the table. I thought I could start with just a sort of a high level overview of kind of the work of the agency, but then we'll talk specifically about the Secretary's office budget. So I think it's important context as you are thinking about our budget to look not just at the upcoming fiscal year, but actually the trends we have seen over the last 6 or 7 years. There is a pretty remarkable amount of funding that has been flowing through A&R and want to touch on that. But then we'll also get into some of the key initiatives and changes in our budget, as well as challenges and the set of one-time investments that are included in the governor's recommend. So as I expect that most of you know, the agency is comprised of 3 departments: Fish and Wildlife, Forest Parks and Recreation, and Environmental Conservation. We also do have a small secretary's office. The head count in the secretary's office is 42. So that's myself and my team, along with our legal services division, as well as some financial staff that support the whole of the agency. The agency as a whole has just north of 650 full-time employees. About half of those are in the Department of Environmental Conservation, or a little more than half, and then the balance is roughly evenly split between Fish and Wildlife and Forest Parks and Recreation. So this graph starts to get at sort of that trend that I think is so important. The governor's recommend for A&R for FY26 is $341.7 million. It's a lot. I often reflect to folks that when I started in this role in working on the 2018 budget, our budget was about $125 million. We show on this chart that in FY19, the agency's budget was right around $200 million. So we have seen this unbelievable growth over the last 7 years. The dark green wedge at the top of this graph represents federal programs, and primarily ARPA and then the bipartisan infrastructure law, where A&R has been the entity given the opportunity to push those dollars out and into projects on the ground. Most of that, as you will see in the department budgets, has gone through the Department of Environmental Conservation, in that there has been significant resources available for water infrastructure work. But there is also money that has flown through the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation to a lesser degree, but significant in terms of their budget, and they will speak to that.
So, Madam Secretary, when are you expecting the federal funds came along thanks to the pandemic? They're going to end sometime. What is the timetable for them going away, and then what happens?
Sure. So I would say, I believe FY '26 is probably peak federal funds
Mhm.
from our perspective in that it's getting towards the end of ARPA. And we have kind of leveled off in terms of the increases we were seeing under the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I would expect over the next 2 fiscal years or maybe 3, that dark green wedge at the top will come back closer to the reality of our base budget. So most of that money is the equivalent of one-time money, right? It's being pushed out into grants and contracts for projects to be constructed on the ground. A portion of it is a revolving loan program. It's coming through our state revolving fund, which provides low-cost loans to municipalities for drinking water and wastewater work. So there will be some continued increase in our capacity in that space long-term, but the bulk of that work will tail off and end. I think the challenge we are facing is that we were given the ability to staff up for these short-term funds. We have between 50 and 60 limited service positions right now, and I can get the exact number if important to you all. That we rely on to do this work. These are both technical positions, but also positions in our business offices that are helping push through all of these grants and contracts. A job with a 5-year lifespan is a pretty appealing job to advertise for, particularly when you're looking at entry-level employees. When you have the last 24 or 18 or 12 months left, it becomes harder to attract quality applicants. And we are starting to see folks that join the agency in a limited service capacity as a permanent position opens up that holds their interest, apply, and are often successful. So one of our leadership challenges at ANR, certainly over the next 2 years, is going to be making sure we maintain the capacity we need to finish this work successfully and yet recognize that this work is going to end.
So it just means you'll be doing less work. You won't be doing these kinds of infrastructure projects. Is that right?
Correct. This is sort of a surge in infrastructure funding that will ultimately kind of come back to something closer to pre-COVID levels.
Yeah, and you do have federal funds in here. I see that blue line, the blue section, and that's stayed pretty consistent, a little bit bigger.
It has stayed pretty consistent. And actually that is one of our budget challenges when you sort of take off that top wedge, right? Is that our federal funds have been pretty stagnant throughout my tenure, and I think it actually predates me. And so as there are inflationary pressures in terms of salaries and healthcare and other expenses, more and more of that is being borne by our special and general funds. And you can see that with those bottom 2 wedges of the stack chart there too.
So how much do you get in federal funds? But never mind the green one, in the blue. What does that sort of represent?
Yeah, it's on a future chart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, when we get there, I'd like to know, and then also what you're worried about with all the federal funds.
Sure.
As it's appropriate to talk about.
Okay.
Thanks.
So just the delta between our current fiscal year budget and the governor's recommend for FY '26 is about 15%. And that is almost all federal funding, although we did see an increase in general fund as well. We are now at the point where 57% of our budget is actually passed through, grants, contracts, loans, et cetera. 28% is salaries for our full-time employees, as well as the significant seasonal staff we bring on, in particular to run our state parks. And it just, again, that 57% as pass-through grants, loans, and contracts, I think is really important to keep in mind. So as I had foreshadowed a little bit earlier, the bulk of these federal resources is flowing through the Department of Environmental Conservation, whose budget is almost 3/4 of the agency's total. And that really does reflect the federal interest in water infrastructure investments under both ARPA and the bipartisan infrastructure law. So as discussed and was shown in that first graph, the budget is comprised of a combination of federal, special, and general funds. Some of those dollars, general fund dollars in particular, are really flexible. Our special and federal funds often have very specific purposes or limitations. At this moment, or in FY 26, I guess I should say, the bipartisan infrastructure law money represents just over 30% of our budget, just to give a sense of where we're likely to come back to. But we do have federal funding from a number of different agencies. And I think Representative Shu, this gets at the question you asked about sort of risk, right? We have federal funding that comes from EPA, from US Fish and Wildlife, from the US Forest Service, and from FEMA. And so we are monitoring those situations closely. I don't know that we have any insight you wouldn't already have, other than we do a weekly check on which of our accounts are accessible, and which ones of them are currently frozen. We stand prepared to draw down federal funds if and as they are available to be drawn down. And it's kind of a real-time exercise. If you have specific questions, happy to try to help answer them too.
Are you, we had Secretary Clark in yesterday to talk about sort of the general, what you're all thinking about as the administration. And she talked about drawing down funds to the fullest amount as soon as possible as you go. Do you actually have some funds that are frozen at this point that you can't access?
Yeah, we have, as of yesterday afternoon, we had 5 accounts that were suspended.
What are those for?
A range of things. One of them is our climate pollution reduction grant. So there's that one. There's an IRA Clean Air Act grant, regional conservation partnership grant. So it's kind of a range of different programs that it impacts at the moment. So.
And you have no idea you know they're frozen and that's about all you know. You don't know when or if they would be released, and how much money are we talking about that you can't access? Do you? Sense of that?
Yeah, for those 5 accounts, the total awards were $7 million. So.
And we do look at them periodically to see if they have been reopened to us with the intention of pulling down funds if and as we can.
What were the other 2? Diesel emissions reduction grant, and then the National Geological and Geophysical Data grant.
What's that one?
It supports our geology division in the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Okay. All right, continue. Sorry, sort of processing all this.
And the other thing to flag is just that the agency also has a very significant number of special funds, total about 40. The biggest ones are our Clean Water Fund, which funds is dedicated to work to implement the Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog pollution budgets. Our State Parks Fund, where gate receipts from our state parks along with ski area revenue is deposited, and that's what supports the operations of our state park system. The Fish and Wildlife Fund, where license fees are deposited, and then our Environmental Permit Fund, which is where DEC issue permits revenue is deposited.
And Representative had a question.
I'm just kind of curious, you may not know the answer to this today, and that's fine here, but I know the U.S. Forest Service has gotten quite a lot of cuts there with personnel here for sure. We have our Green Mountain National Forest here in the state. We have some working relationship with them. Have you seen any change there at all, or know of any at this point in time with that?
I haven't, but Commissioner Fitzko might be better positioned to answer that question when she comes up to.
Sure, yeah,
testify.
wait. So you can ask them. Yeah.
Right, because they laid off 3,000 from
35.
national parks and US Forest Service.
Sorry, that's fine.
Thank you. So this is just another chart that gives you a different way to slice and dice our budget. The 2 vertical green bars represent the federal funds. One is sort of that one-time money, bipartisan infrastructure law, the lighter green bar on the left. The Kelly green bar in the middle is what I would describe as our base federal funding. And then the kind of matrix on the right-hand side of this chart shows general funds and our biggest ticket special funds. So our budget, our state fiscal 26 budget does maintain current service levels across departments. That is a challenge in that budgetary pressures from the cost of living increases, benefits, internal service funds were all significant, but we were able to put together a budget that met those budget pressures without programmatic increase or programmatic impacts. And again, just flagging that we have this really dramatic increase in grants in and out and loans as a result of the work we're engaged in right now.
And you have a lot of work. And one of the things we've been concerned about ever since, we've gotten all the extra funds is your staffing and capacity for getting all the money out the door. And how's that going?
I couldn't be prouder of the work this agency has done. We actually had a little mini celebration about a month ago at a division directors meeting because we successfully deployed all of our ARPA dollars before the time ran out on that clock. For perspective, A&R saw about $250 million worth of ARPA funds. And that is reflected in, a handful of very large projects, but also for example, more than 600 Healthy Homes Awards, right? And I think you will hear from some of our business office folks, there isn't a whole lot of difference in one small award or one big award in terms of the amount of work. So that to me is the good news story. I think we have had challenges around staffing, less not having the right number of positions, and more that there are types of positions critical to this work that are very challenging for us to fill as state agencies. Business office positions, and Kim McKee, I think, can speak to that in particular when she's up from DEC, but also engineers and lawyers. And as you might expect, I think those are jobs where you can command a significantly higher salary in the private sector than you are able to gain in state government. And so those have been some of the toughest spots for us, is both hiring those positions, but then maintaining staff in those positions. And every time you turn over staff, you sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so that has been a concern. And as I say, I am anxious that over the next 24 months, it will be an even more significant challenge than it has been for the last 3 to 4 years.
Your question.
So the pass-through money, you get a certain percentage that you can use for operations and staffing?
So there's an indirect rate that we are able to claim, but I would defer to the department business offices to talk a little bit more about that, unless Steve.
Just in general,
to...
is it adequate to pay for the services that you're providing by passing through the money?
Yeah, I mean, the agency as a whole has an indirect rate, which is somewhere between 21 and 28% in a given year. So we apply those to federal awards where indirect rates are allowed, but not all federal awards allow for that. So it's not a perfect fit necessarily.
It doesn't necessarily pay for all the costs.
Correct, depending on the award, yeah. So
It'd be interesting to know if how much deficit there might be that the state has to pick up.
So I think in terms of ARPA, we worked with the Agency of Administration and a whole of government solution where the cost of those limited service positions to administer those funds are being paid for out of the ARPA award. I think in terms of our state revolving fund awards, there is a administrative fee or an indirect that we are able to pull down to cover staff costs. So I think in general, we are being made whole. But it is a bit of piecing it together and some really good work by the business office staff to make sure we're not upside down in accepting these federal awards.
Thanks.
So just this is a pretty quick summary of what is new or what is big and new in our fiscal 26 budget. Again, significant increase in grants and loans. Significant increase in salaries and benefits, decrease in contracts, and mostly call that out because otherwise it sort of gets in the wash of if we say pass through money, grants and loans is increasing, contracts is decreasing, but the amount going out is net positive or net bigger than it was in state fiscal 25.
And when you say grants and loans, is this mostly clean water related things?
Mostly, yeah. I mean, that dominates almost everything we've talked about here today.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
So other notable changes in our budget include an increase in land acquisitions, and this is largely, I believe, state match for other funds we are able to access, and work being done both in the Fish and Wildlife and Forest and Parks departments. We did see a significant increase in internal service funds, which frankly just reflects salary and benefit increases in those agencies of state government. We did increase our vacancy savings. This is done to reflect our reality, which is how we've worked to budget these over the last several years. And as I indicated, we've seen more churn, and more churn results in more vacancy savings, but this is not an enhanced number in any way. It is truly reflective of our reality. The Agency of Agriculture runs the Vermont Agricultural and Environmental Lab on behalf of both agencies and has put out a new fee schedule effective January 1st, because we talked about this a little bit in budget adjustment and had said we would come back to you with most of the ask as part of our FY26 budget, in large part because most of our water samples are collected during the summer months. And that $500,000 increase in general fund is to cover that change in their fee schedule. And then we are in the process of expanding our CAPO permitting program in response to a petition CLF had filed with the EPA. We developed a corrective action plan this fall that's still in the finalization process, going back and forth with EPA. But one of the things they've made clear to us is we do not have sufficient staff to meet what they see as our obligations. And so the budget does include 2 new permitting positions for that program.
So that's some of this is getting transferred from Agency of Ag, right, to you?
No, so
Transfer happening.
not right now. So the CAPO permits are for farms that have discharges. The ag agency issues what are called no discharge permits. So the challenge is not everything that's covered under the ag agency's no discharge permits is necessarily part and parcel of a CAPO permit. Things like odors and flies and traffic are all things that the ag agency reviews, but aren't part of what EPA is concerned about. We are working on a set of proposed legislative changes to give us some authorities we'll need to implement the CAPO program, but included in that is a stakeholder work group to look at that area of overlap specifically and make some recommendations back to the General Assembly.
Thanks, Rep. Rouge.
So both direct and indirect discharge permits or
No, these would be just discharge permit.
just direct discharge?
Correct. So non-point source would continue to be regulated by the ag agency.
Did you have a question, Jen?
No.
Okay, all right.
And then I think this is the last slide, maybe. Oh, there's one more. This is the one-time investments. I'm going to start with the middle one, which is the $850,000, because it is the other piece of what is needed for the CAPO work. And there's sort of 2 components to that. One is the ag agency has, over the last several years, developed a very robust tracking database that they use to maintain their farm inspection records. This would allow us to build our own interface onto their database, take advantage of that kind of underlying infrastructure, create a comprehensive data set of all farm inspections, and sort of help ensure the work remains coordinated between the 2 agencies. In addition, we don't know what we don't know. And so as we start to do additional assessments of farms, there's also resources proposed to provide contracted or other capacity to support our work. The big ticket item on that list is the continuation of the work needed to remediate and mitigate the impacts of PCB contamination in schools. Overall, there's $10 million. The other $480,000 that isn't shown here is in the health department's budget, where it funds a limited service position there that has been integral to that effort. This will allow us to perform remediation and mitigation activities in schools that we have already tested and identify contamination. We are not proposing additional testing.
Right, okay.
And finally, there's $50,000 that would allow us to develop some design standards for municipal water and wastewater connections. This was put forward as part of the administration's housing bill. We've proposed a series of changes around connections to streamline permitting, as that's a pinch point we've heard from communities or from developers where they feel like they're being reviewed and regulated by the municipality and then re-reviewed and regulated by A&R. We're going to create a general permit and some standard details. And if they follow those standard details, it will essentially be just a reporting exercise for the developers because we have recognized that there is value in the records A&R maintains. We had 2 communities that were doing their own permitting for a while, and when they turn their records back over to us, they are incomplete. And so feel like maintaining that information is important, but also looking to streamline that permitting process. In addition, and as you will hear from the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife, the department's budget continues to have significant challenges. There is some bridge funding provided in the FY26 budget as we work at a larger financial restructuring. And then there is $80,000 to upgrade the warden's radio equipment because it no longer functions on the network available to them.
And we'll hear more there. Okay.
Oh, right. I forgot that slide was in there.
This is what-
This is the last one. Finally, this is just a list of the things we are working on. I would say that go above and beyond the infrastructure work I have talked about. The agency has an incredible workload right now. A number of the things on this list I would describe as underfunded historically, meaning we've been given all of the work and a part of the resources to do the work. And just ask that be considered before additional obligations to the agency are looked at. You know, picking at a couple of these, for example, Act 121, which is the Flood Safety Act, that was passed last session. We indicated we needed 18 positions in 6 years to accomplish the work. We were given 15 positions in 3 years and then funding for 11 positions. And I couldn't in good conscience hire positions I didn't have full funding for. So we are in the process of hiring those 11 positions, but also with the 3% additional general fund provided in the governor's budget and the pressures we were seeing, financial pressures we were seeing, are not in a position to move forward with those additional 4 positions, even though they exist. Would also flag Act 181, Act 250 modernization, where we indicated we needed 4 positions to support our roles in that work. And we're told that would be something the legislature would take up this session, but currently do not have any positions to support our engagement there. And the practical effect is just that we are stretched further and further. And it is increasingly a challenging workload for staff to navigate and feel like they are being successful in their jobs.
Yes, Rep. Jenkins.
Yeah, thank you. Where does the 3-acre rule fit into these? Where does it?
It is in there. It is part of Act 64, the Clean Water Act. It was a requirement of Act 64, which was passed, I think, in 2016, that we stand up a 3-acre stormwater permit program and implement it. And so now we're in the implemented phase of that work, and certainly have heard significant concerns being raised by entities that are regulated under that program about complexity and cost. We have been working with Senator Chittenden on a set of potential reforms to the 3-acre permitting program, both to provide additional financial tools to those who need to implement, as well as potentially more time, but recognize that that is a challenge. That said, the 3-acre program is an important component of our ability to meet our obligations to EPA regarding Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog. So I don't know that backing away from it is realistic.
Yeah, one of the criticism, maybe it wasn't a criticism, but it was a reality check that as this was being starting up, it was a while ago.
Yeah.
Is that there weren't enough engineers to be hired or expertise to be hired within the state of Vermont to do this, and the deadline that was established, I assume we've probably stretched that out. But you talk about technical expertise and finding good people and finding enough people, and are
Yes.
they out there somewhere? But this was one that I remember being quite a bit of discussion about. Can you talk about how that, I mean, obviously you have that same issue probably with most of these, but.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's not limited to 3 acre. We've heard the same thing around corrective action plans for brownfields and concerns around some of the infrastructure investments we've been endeavoring to make, and people who are available to do the design for drinking water and wastewater treatment system improvements. I think the fact of the matter is the workforce challenges that abound in Vermont are equally present in ANR's space. And it becomes a drag on how quickly we are able to do the work, both in terms of the quantity of work that consultants are able to pass through, but also the quality of the submittals we end up receiving, because they just have so much going on.
So the next question is okay, if that's the case, and we've got this list of about 6 or 8 things here, how do you go and actually accomplish what these legislative mandates say on any one of these or in all of them together? When you can't find the people, there probably isn't an unending amount of money coming down the pike anytime soon.
Correct.
We had our money with ARPA. But, I mean, how do you deal with that? Because it just means like you never really, like you take baby steps and you never really accomplish the goals. That's how I see it.
Well, I would like to think we will ultimately accomplish the goals, but you're right. It becomes the timelines. Generally, time is the knob that we can turn, and appreciating that time is money, and the longer we stretch these things out, that they end up costing more. The easiest lever to pull is to ask for more time. We have asked for more time around the Flood Safety Act. Last session, the legislature granted a request we had made for more time around the Environmental Justice Act. I think we will probably ask for more time to develop the conservation plan, statewide conservation plan required by Act 59, although VHCB is leading on that effort. I don't ever want to lose sight of the goals of any of these laws. I think they're really important. Global Warming Solutions Act, also probably going to have a big conversation about whether 2030 is achievable or aspirational. But it doesn't mean that we aren't constantly moving towards those goals. And, frankly, I see it as the job of leadership to help manage the workload on staff so they feel like they have jobs they can be successful.
One more question, please. I represent St. Albans town with the Bay.
Yep.
With all of the things that go into that Lake Champlain work, which is really very much a source of all of this concern about cleaning up the water. How are you measuring that, Julie, that you can see that we're making progress or we're not making progress?
So we issue an annual clean water performance report. It was delivered to the General Assembly on January 15th of this year. And it is tracking all of the projects taking place on the ground. It provides then modeled estimates of the benefits of those projects, and we're able to aggregate them to show how much progress we've made towards the goals in Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog, recognizing that there's a whole bunch of ecological processes that happen from when phosphorus leaves a parcel of land before it actually ends up in the lake. The real measure of success will be pure or ideally no harmful algal blooms in Lake Champlain or Lake Memphremagog. But what it shows is we are 8 years into a 20-year project, and we've achieved somewhere between 25 and 30% of the necessary load reduction in Lake Champlain by counting up all of the projects and practices that have been implemented. If you're interested, that team has a wonderful presentation. I can also send the committee the link to at least the executive summary of the annual report. But it is an incredibly informative report.
So you feel like you're making progress?
I do.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. And I know we're running late for the rest of your committee.
Yes.
Rep. LaRouche, do you have a quick question?
No, not a question, but I'm skeptical. I mean, we haven't seen any improvements yet in anything, and we know, and having dealt with models quite a bit over the past, I recognize that garbage in gets garbage out. And the problem is, what will be our consequences at a certain point in time, it's going to become obvious whether we have or have not solved the problem. And if we find out that we have not, or if data comes in that demonstrates that we have not, what will be the consequences?
That's a challenging question, right? EPA has a finite set of tools in their toolbox, and they mostly focus on wastewater treatment facilities. And our wastewater facilities are less than 5% of the pollutant load going into those bodies. I would say this is in part a reflection of the fact the Clean Water Act doesn't do a good job around non-point source pollution. We put together a program that I think does seek to address non-point source pollution sort of at a level that is equivalent to the load being delivered from those non-point sources. That said, I think we have to maintain a degree of humility that this is a really complex ecosystem and we have a fairly basic model. One of my favorite model sayings is all models are wrong, some models are useful. I think our tools are useful. I think they are showing us that we are implementing projects that are only to the good. Whether they'll be enough, I think is a valid question and one we're not prepared to answer yet. That said, we maintain not just this database of project work, but actively engage in long-term monitoring jointly with New York and Quebec to make sure, and the Lake Champlain Basin Program, to make sure we have a comprehensive picture of in-lake water quality conditions, as well as the contributions from the major tributaries. So we are tracking all of that and we'll continue to track and then adapt if necessary, if it appears we are off track.
Thanks.
Are we done?
No, we've got,
More?
I don't know, we stopped sharing our screen, just a second. We've just got
We're on the
a,
last page of all the
well,
initiatives.
correct, and then we've just got a quick Secretary's Office budget presentation.
Oh, okay. We have it also.
I think we got it.
Yep.
All right, so we will move right through this. We can skip over that even, Steve. So just quickly, the organizational structure for the overall agency, we touched on this a little bit, but 3 departments, and then within the Secretary's office, it's our financial services, legal services, Office of Policy and Planning, which is really our connection with Act 250 and Section 248, our climate office, and then our environmental justice and civil rights unit. So in terms of our Secretary's office budget, we are largely dominated by personal services, our staff, and we are largely general fund in the Secretary's office. The special funds we do see we receive a fraction of the fees that are paid in Section 248 and Act 250 proceedings that largely help cover the costs of our policy and planning and legal services team time. So just again, looking at how that budget breaks out, we do have a significant number of lawyers, as I had indicated, and so that is the most significant component of our budget. But you get a sense this roughly equates out to the number of staff in each of those. The one box that may bear a little explanation is the blue box on the right-hand side that says regional offices. ANR has 5 regional offices, and we pay the rent for those facilities out of the central office budget, Secretary's office budget. So the budget challenges for us in terms of FY26, again, are these increases in salaries and benefits. We did tweak our vacancy savings number based on current trends. Our vacancy savings number tends to be pretty small because we're 42 staff. We have looked to do some work, and by we, I really mean Steve, has done a lot of work helping us
look at our actuals as well as our budgeted services and do a better job lining those two things up. We have downsized our footprint in a couple of locations and eliminated leases that we no longer need. In part reflecting sort of how we're working post-COVID. We did have significant increases in some of the internal service funds and most notably our service level agreement with the Agency of Digital Services.
It was so important you put it in there twice.
Yep. Indeed. And then we did make a modest transfer of base funds to the Fish and Wildlife Department. And would just note that that's a reflection of how significant I think the budget challenges are that lie ahead for that. Going. We did talk about all of these, and then as I noted at the bottom, we'll take up the financial restructuring of the Fish and Wildlife Department in FWD's testimony. And did want to talk a little bit about the climate.
Somebody needs to mute the screen.
Oh, all right. The climate. The Climate Superfund Act. So this was passed by this body last session. We were directed to work with the Treasurer's Office on a feasibility report that we submitted in January. What we flagged in that feasibility report is that additional appropriations are needed in order to fulfill the obligations that are created. There was $600,000 in initial appropriations provided to start that work that was split evenly between the Treasurer's Office and ANR. And we have projected an additional need of 1.2 million in one-time funds in fiscal 26 to complete the work prescribed by that bill. We've also proposed a set of changes to deadlines contained in that bill. That $1.2 million in one-time funds is not part of the governor's recommend, in part because our report was due after he built his budget, and in part because I think he's continues to have concerns about the overall cost of this effort. But just wanted to make sure to highlight here this morning that there is a gap between the resources available and what it will actually take to fulfill those
So
obligations.
is the 600,000 part of the 1.2 or in addition to? So 1.8 is what you're talking about.
Well, we have 600. That was it. The 600,000 was provided in FY 25.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah. And then we've just got the budget development forms. And if you have any questions, I would be happy for Steve to answer them.
Pretty standard.
They are.
It's pretty standard. Okay. Great. Any other questions for the central office? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It, all the work you're doing. It's been interesting times.
It is interesting time.
And hopefully you'll get some accounts unfrozen soon. Great. So who is next?
I think it's going on the
Okay. And then we'll take a break between DEC and Fish and Wildlife. We have copies of things, so.
Yeah, great there.
There should be some from behind you.
Morning all. Let's like a little bit. We got our act.
Here you are, okay. We'll remove coats on the other chairs for next time. So introduce yourselves and take it away, please.
Please, good morning, all. Madam Chair, my name is Jason Batchelder. I'm the EC Commissioner. I've been in the role a little over a year, maybe a little over that. My background is with the agency. I was the director of the Warden Service for a long time. The gray beard betrays me, but I'm better for those years, and I was brought back to the agency by Julie to lead the EC. Had a wonderful career with the Warden Service, and this has been a dynamic reentry into the world of conservation. Joined by the most recent past WID director, Neil Kamen, who is now our deputy commissioner. Extremely lucky to have him here today, and we'll lean on him for a lot of the big money questions in this presentation. He's responsible, or was, for over 120 million of our dollars that you'll see in our budget, which I know that the secretary explained very well, and hopefully we'll be able to get into any more granular questions that you might have. And Kim McKee, who is our director of the Administration and Innovation Division, who is also our business manager and wears many other hats. Some hope she'll get into maybe a little bit here today. But we are here to present the 2026 governor's recommended budget. And I'll reiterate that we're a big entity, and I will lean on the brains to my left and right for help here. But I think you'll see that we have met the governor's requirements. We have managed our department responsibly, and we are looking to the future for progressive and responsible management for our constituents, for the state, for you, and we take it very seriously. Our first slide is our run of show, and we'll go over our organizational structure, our budget overview, our one-time investments, key changes, position changes, significant initiatives and challenges, and our budget development form, if you wish. We'll certainly provide it to you. Our organizational structure with us in the middle there consists of our management and support services, which is the three of us, and to include our environmental compliance division. Those are EEOs. You have heard of Healthy Homes. We have those folks not only assisting, but enforcing our environmental laws, and more appropriately, I think we do a very good job of handholding in that space. The laws in Vermont are extraordinarily complex, as you all know. Way beyond me to be able to get into even some of the minutia with that. And imagine a person with a failed septic that lives in a single family mobile home, trying to manage that with an income of 30 grand and a bill of 25 grand. That's where ECD comes into play. Does a magnificent job. I always like to plug them. They're a small group that fights way above their weight class. We also house the Geological Survey and the state geologist, Dr. Ben DeYoung. He's come into his glory with landslides lately, and has inserted himself very appropriately into the buyout discussions, and looking ahead through great new technology and wonderful partners, what we are looking to expect if floods persist, and we think that they will. We have the Office of Waters, where Neil formerly sat, Deputy Commissioner Kamen, with Water Investment Division. He's our pass-through bank for the department, and he has a couple of slides here that I'll ask him to lead into, to give you all a more appropriate look into the life of those folks and where our money comes from and goes to. And then our did I say water? Sorry about that. I'm just trying to read around. That's all right. No, I'm good. Yeah. And then Watershed Management Division. They are nutrient management, rivers, lakes, flood safety, and then I will mention, and I'll mention again, that they're our biggest division. They actually have 100 folks within Watershed Management Division. And then drinking water and groundwater protection. Managing the huge world of PFAS that's only likely to get bigger and more intimidating. And then also waste management and prevention. So News VT, the landfill, and also emerging contaminants in the world of PCBs and brownfields. and our Air Quality and Climate Division, which also has a big hand in monitoring, regulating worlds like noxious fumes and particulate matter, and also the dump and that world. So we'll move on to our budget overview. You're familiar with this slide format. We do have some significant ups from last year, and we have a few downs, which I'll explain a little bit. And please ask questions here. This is where I feel some of the numbers can appear confusing. So as I mentioned, we are the largest budget within the agency. For this fiscal year, we are looking at an overall increase from 209 million budgeted in state fiscal year 2025 to nearly 245 million in state fiscal year 2026. For context, in 2023, prior to the IIJA and bill, we were passing through DEC about 117 million. Big numbers of big increase in numbers. Primary driver is that increase in federal funds issued through grants and loans. Our operations also include several special funds, including the Environmental Permit Fund, which is where most of our environmental permit programs fees are collected, and the Environmental Contingency Fund, which pays for investigation and cleanup of say, spills and other contaminants where there is a responsible party, where there is not a responsible party to go after. I apologize. Next down, we'll see our built-in 3% general fund increase, which is standard, same as last year. We were able to absorb those pressures for 2026 using available special fund balances for salary increases and benefit costs. You'll see a couple decreases there in operating and interdepartmental transfer expenses, which are primarily due to a reduction in the department administrative services allocation. We have been able to shift key essential service positions from the admin services charge to the federal indirect funding for this. And for the next few fiscal years, thanks to increase in indirect costs generated by federal economic recovery program dollars. Happy to have Kim take questions on that if you have any.
I do have a question about you've put one-time appropriation into the base.
Oh, yes, just to clarify the note at the bottom, our Vantage budgeting system reports included DEC's one-time funds for FY25 in this budget roll-up table. So I backed out those one-time funds from the main portion of the chart so that it just represents DEC's base budget. And just wanted to clarify why you may see a discrepancy between Vantage and this table in this presentation.
And the one-time, the 2.4 million is for what?
The one-time appropriations from FY25 included the new salary costs from the Act 121 Flood Safety Act positions. Other one-times included there were one-time costs also related to the Flood Safety Act. There may be another bucket of funds in there.
So this is all in the current fiscal year. And then the 4 million was part of the contingency list that we had, and you were able to get that.
Correct.
I'm trying to remember what the 4 million was for.
4 million included the Healthy Homes one-time fund.
Okay, great, thank you.
Also, there was 2 million in dam safe. Lower down.
The unsafe dam revolving loan funds.
Okay, thank you.
So we're on to our budget overview as it relates to our programs and divisions. So this chart represents the breakdown of our budgets across our 9 divisions. Largest blocks represent our 5 media divisions and our commissioner's office, where many internal service costs are administered. Our Office of Water's appropriation is comprised of WID, what we call WID. It's the Water Investment Division, where Deputy Commissioner Cameron used to be the director. On a positive note, we are hiring that position, and we've had some extraordinary responses in that role. I know that question comes up a lot, and we are experiencing hiring challenges as anyone, but we are in the midst of hiring, and it's the future's bright for that position, on a positive note. Watershed Management Division and Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Divisions are the other portions of that Office of Waters, as I mentioned. The Air and Waste Appropriation includes Waste Management and Prevention and the Air Quality and Climate Division, as I mentioned. Much smaller budgets, but still significant. And the Management and Support Services Division, which includes our office here, Administration and Innovation Division, ECD, and the Vermont Geological Survey. Our Water Investment Division passes through significant state revolving loan fund dollars, which you'll hear more about if you wish, to support critical water and wastewater infrastructure, and has brought recent large increases to the DEC budget with IIJA and bill funding. This year, our Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division takes second in billing budget size due to the WIN grants, which stands for Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation, to small and underserved and disadvantaged communities. The Waste Management and Prevention Division also has considerable funds passed through from the federal government for management of contaminated and Superfund sites. Also, a portion of bill is there too. And the Watershed Management Division, as I mentioned, is our largest division by FTEs, 100 staff on any given day, plus or minus. As you can imagine, an organization of that size is always hiring, and someone seems to be retiring quite frequently too. And they have the second largest slice of the budget. On to, and I'll pause for questions there. I'm sorry, if anyone has any, please go ahead. If not, we're on to our one-time DEC investments. As the secretary got into quite a bit, we have a draft CAFO corrective action plan under review by the US EPA, which commits us to inspect farms and issue CAFO permits. This is going to be expensive. And we're looking for $250,000 for implementation of a database for CAFO permitting. And as the secretary mentioned, those funds will expand on an existing database. Additionally, $600,000 for contracted support and to bridge the gap until we are up to speed, funded and staffed with this program. We do want to act in a timely manner here.
So the 600 is not for employee, are there limited service positions?
We will, I have a slide on that coming up, but these are permanent positions we will be needing for this operation.
But yes, that's correct. The $600 is for contracted support.
How many positions is that?
That would be
I don't know that it worked out directly to
Okay.
positions. It's just, it is, we don't know what we don't know. And so we're trying to give ourselves flexibility to effectively come back in late 26. So before the start of the next biennium with a set of recommendations.
Okay, this is your best guess. Okay, great, thanks. Wayne?
So have you, Department of Ag has been doing inspections of some sort on farms very long. So have you interacted with them to, how is that going to mesh together? Are they going to stop doing what they've been doing? Or are you aware that what they've been doing may dovetail in any way or be part and parcel of what you think you're going to have to do? Or is it just, you haven't studied it yet, so you don't know?
There's a part of all of that will be true. We certainly are aware they're a close sister agency. We are certainly aware of the operations that Ag has carried to this point. What this proposal does is when there is a discharge, simply those enforcement actions will come to us. There will no longer be a shared jurisdiction with certain farms. And so we feel, and I think some of the common sentiment is that one enforcement entity will be more responsible. It'll be more fiscally sound. It'll make for more certainty for the farming community. And cleaner water as a result. more one-time investments. Secretary had spoken about the municipal wastewater connection sign standards. I'll elaborate just a bit on what this is. So the $50,000 to support development of a technical standards database. So these funds will be used to contract with an engineering firm to update technical standards and develop and design a manual for wastewater connections. Am I repeating what you said, Secretary Moore? I feel like I am.
Expanding on it.
I'm expanding on it. How about that? Yeah. These improvements will bring greater consistency and predictability to the permitting process and modernize standards for water and wastewater connections. Anyone has any angst or questions about that? I'm happy to have some back and forth with our director. And it seems like a small amount compared to everything else on the page, but it is important.
Yeah, and the details, I'm sure you're talking to the Environment Committee about all of this stuff as well, right?
You will be, absolutely.
So that's where they'll get into more of the details of this.
Okay.
Please, if I may. So for the record, Neil Cameron, Deputy Commissioner DEC, so that the tape under recognizes my voice. This is also part and parcel of the sort of larger housing package that the administration is pursuing, and this is intended specifically to streamline the permitting of connections of businesses and new housing developments to municipal existing wastewater. Make it a little bit easier for folks who are trying to develop housing to plug and play into their existing infrastructure, streamline the department's oversight of that.
Okay, so general and housing may be seeing some of this also. Do they already have that bill from the governor's office?
I am aware that there's been a big roadshow and testimony with that. I'm not sure where the bill is.
Okay.
Text is out there.
No, I think the bill's still budget.
All right.
But we're certainly prepared to talk about this. It's a small but important piece.
Yeah. So that's probably where that will happen. Yeah, when we get the bill. Great, thanks.
And lastly, continued funding for testing and remediation of PCBs in schools.
Not testing new.
Sorry, I say testing every time and it's not testing. I just.
Testing right on, so maybe we want to take that.
I wrote down, I did. I will scratch it on my end. So no testing, remediation. Apologize for that. Completely responsible for that word being. But this is important work. These are known carcinogens. This work is necessary to make our schools a safe place for our kids to be. This work is something that our waste management division is very passionate about and are very capable of doing. As you know, PCBs are likely everywhere, but some people have tolerances higher than others, and those lower tolerances are in kids. And so I appreciate that we've been able to get money in years past through the administration and you find folks, and I appreciate being able to look forward to this. It's very important to our staff and to our effort as an environmental agency.
Can you tell me how the process for determining which schools get assistance first is made?
I think in the interest of time, I would ask the secretary to do that for me. I can give you a bumbled answer, but hers would be much more accurate.
Fine.
Sure. So in the schools we have tested, we have two different thresholds for evaluating them against. One is called the school action level, which means there are sort of long-term concerns about exposure to that level of PCBs. And then there's also an immediate action level. And so we have developed a prioritization matrix, and we're happy to share it with you, that speaks to addressing areas of primary instruction with exceedances of the immediate action level first. So classrooms with high levels of PCBs would be the first place we would go. Then other areas with exceedances of the immediate action level, and then areas where there are exceedances of the school action level. But we've written all that out, and I'm happy to share all the paper with you.
Would it actually list the schools?
I don't believe it does. It is a framework. If you have a specific school, I can certainly gather the information about that school too.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'll be touch on that today, Rebecca. Okay. Significant initiatives and challenges listed here are ARPA, bill, management of PFAS in the environment. I will back up and ask Deputy Commissioner Cameron to just touch base on why these are significant. I know the Secretary has alluded to this, and it's evident to the committee, but we well, I'll just keep going here and then back up. PCBs in schools, Flood Safety Act of 2024, our CAFO program, which we've talked about, and reduced nutrient pollution to lakes, rivers, and wetlands. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you have anything to elaborate on as far on ARPA and Bill, I think the committee would like to hear it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So for the past several years, I've been involved with Kim McKee and others in the agency, including the Secretary, in standing up all of the American Rescue Plan Act programs that the department administers. That's about $200 million of effort across several programmatic areas. They're all incredible efforts that are being led by really dedicated professionals that are either in these limited service positions or are in permanent positions, and they're doing the ARPA work to get it done. So we spoke a little bit about the Healthy Homes program. So these are beneficiary payments to low-income Vermonters for basic septic systems or basic wells. I will not paint you a picture of the types of situations that we're helping, but they're incredibly compelling. Assisting manufactured housing communities to have decent water systems, decent wastewater systems, stormwater, and by association, becoming kind of a major player in the space of helping manufactured housing communities provide super important housing stock to Vermonters. So we're working with other entities, VHFA, Conservation Housing Board, to meet a lot of those needs. We have a particular program dedicated towards village water and wastewater infrastructure where none exists. 200 villages in Vermont lack either wastewater, centralized water, or both. So we're targeting several villages to build new systems. You may have heard about that. Fundamental basic stormwater infrastructure, combined sewer overflow work, and a lot of 3-acre stormwater. Representative, you had asked about that earlier. So, and as Secretary Moore mentioned, we got all of those dollars out the door timely before the U.S. Treasury's deadline for appropriations. So the clock is still ticking, but that clock is now ticking on our recipients, and we're doing everything we can to help them make their way through the processes. Bipartisan infrastructure law is a huge big deal for the Water Investment Division for the department. So even though I'm no longer technically the director of that division, I continue to serve double duty until my replacement is hired. These are very large infusions of funds coming into the state revolving loan funds for drinking water and for clean water. So drinking water supports drinking water systems. Clean water, think wastewater treatment plants, think stormwater management, think 3-acre, things like that. Those dollars come with a substantial amount of forgiveness. We are required to give away 49% of the dollars in the form of grants or forgivable loans. So the multiplier factor when we match and draw down these federal dollars is tremendous. And we are working very hard. We've seen, and I'll say this in front of our capital committees as well, when we have the opportunity to do that testimony, we're seeing.
We're being distracted by the noises outside. I think he was just checking.
He was just checking.
They can always tone it down. Yeah, thank you.
We see unprecedented demand for infrastructure across our cities and our small towns right now, coming to the revolving loan funds for BIL assistance. I had reported to Representative Squirrel sort of in the hallway a couple of weeks ago that when the grants were first all labeled up as suspended by the federal government, we were looking at 18 or 20 lines, 20 accounts, over $101 million. So now the fact that we're down to 5 is actually good news, and all of those infrastructure funds continue to flow, but we're keeping tight track of that. And I'm happy to bring people in to talk more about BIL, to talk about infrastructure with you if you'd like, but it's incredibly important for our municipalities, and our divisions are doing the best they can to move those dollars out. Something else you wanted me to
No,
cover?
thank you. I couldn't have done it justice, but I know it's important that amount of money to know granular details. So thank you. One more piece I'll touch on here is the PFAS remediation, identifying sources in the environment and reducing commercial products is something that we spend a lot of time on, and something that you'll undoubtedly hear about more in the future. It's a big challenge for us, and it will continue to be. We do have a roadmap and a summarized bullet pointed roadmap, sort of cliff notes. If anyone would like to see that, happy to share that with you. It's very compelling and it's very educational. Key budget changes for 2026, as Deputy Commissioner Cameron spoke about, bill and IIJ funding for significant project efforts with our existing state revolving loan fund programs are included, and grant programs to help public water systems in small and underserved and disadvantaged communities achieve compliance with drinking water regulation costs.
And you've had no trouble drawing down funds for those projects?
No, I think
That's
They're available to draw.
Okay, great.
ongoing and other operational costs, salary and benefits increase of 3.2 million across all base funding sources, and net decrease in contractual costs of 9.9 million, including a reduction for groundwater remediation at the Commerce Street site in 2026, and reduced activity and lead service line inventories are why that's reflected. Continued budget key changes. So as the Secretary mentioned, a $507,000 increase in fees for samples submitted to the Vail Lab, the Vermont Agriculture and Environmental Lab, which we run in conjunction with Ag. And a decrease of $706,000 across all appropriations for our internal administrative services, and some other minor adjustments. 2 new positions, environmental analyst 5s to support the CAFO program, permitting corrective action in our watershed management division, the CAFO section. It's a big job with small staff, and so we're looking to increase that for all the reasons that we mentioned earlier. And I consider that my last slide. I'd like to pass it on to Kim to continue if you wish, but I understand you may not want to in the interest of time. Happy to.
5 minutes on the budget development forum.
Great, that sounds great. I know it's a lot of monitoring to keep
Well,
that accurate.
Right, a lot of this is pretty standard, so if there are things you want to just sort of highlight for us, it's great.
For the record, Kim McKee, Director of the Administration and Innovation Division here at DEC. So we have the budget development form for the whole department presented on this slide. So this represents a roll-up of the 3 appropriations referenced previously: management and support services, air and waste, and the Office of Waters. Begin with salary and benefits. And as Jason mentioned, DEC did incur a $3.2 million increase across all salary and benefits. It's a little less easy to follow in this particular slide, given that in FY25 we received $1.675 million in new position costs for the Flood Safety Act that was added to the other personal services line in our budget. So those costs have been moved to the salary line up here, which is why the salary increase looks so minimal compared to the remainder. But just wanted to share that's sort of why the math works out this way within the context of this form. Moving on, we have all the typical benefits included here: internal service fund increases, Julie mentioned earlier, changes to our vacancy turnover savings, DEC increased our savings from 625,000 to 1,050,000 this year, which represents kind of 6 or 7 rolling positions. And as mentioned, really just reflects that the reality of our retention and recruitment challenges at this juncture. We're averaging about 20 positions vacant at any time. Looking at data from fiscal year 24, roughly a third of our vacancies are filled by internal hires, and vacancies beget vacancies. And specifically in the business office, of a staff of 26 in our finance division or section, that we're averaging about 3 to 4 vacancies at any given time due to a lot of the challenges the secretary described earlier.
On that, but I'll let you go. I'll ask you later when she's done with this.
Okay, continue. Net changes in contracts and third-party services, as Jason mentioned, we're seeing a net decrease from FY25 to 26 of about 9.9 million, and that it is largely due to a reduction from a one-time large contract for groundwater remediation at the Commerce Street Superfund site, also driven by a reduction in the lead service line inventory work. DEC sees large fluctuations from year to year in grants and contracts. Sometimes the project will pivot from a grant to a contract and vice versa. Those are kind of the main drivers to discuss in that line item. Net change in temps, we have a $150,000 increase, or I'm sorry, $125,000 increase in temps in our watershed management division, which is by and large a right sizing of that budget to reflect the increase, salary costs over time, and reflect our current need for temporary services. There's also some minimal temp costs in our management support services related to after action flood recovery planning, and some needs to fill in for some vacancies while several members of the team are on family and medical leave. We mentioned the transfer of regulatory authority over CAFO. The 227K we see here is the two new positions coming to DEC and the salary and benefit portion of those costs. And you'll see in the next section below under operating, the operating associated with those positions broken out. So moving on to operating expenses, in gray highlight our internal service fund increases that we received and managed to absorb. Following those line items in other equipment and environmental site work, these are also just one-time reductions from FY25 to 26. 262,000 was purchase of air monitoring equipment under our Inflation Reduction Act Clean Air Act grant. And the environmental site work is a reduction to a BIL funded project with environmental site work at the Commerce Street site from FY25. Following those items, we have a line item for increase in costs for IT systems and software licenses, an increase in ArcGIS licenses, mapping software for $6,000, and also an increase for Salesforce licenses and operation and maintenance due to implementation of a new loans grants management system that help administer some of these large infrastructure loans. From a financial perspective, just some minor shifts and increases in lease costs and the lab services increase in the next row was mentioned earlier, an increase of $507,000 due to the fee increase proposed by the Agency of Agricultural Farms and Markets. The next line item is a net decrease in the admin spread and other various changes in operating costs and reallocation of funding sources. And as Jason mentioned, our receipt and pass through of these large federal economic recovery programs has bolstered our indirect cost pool that we can draw from to pivot some central service positions onto that funding source for this in the next few fiscal years, which has helped kind of ease the pressure on our admin services fee that we charge to our media divisions, our Office of Waters and Air and Waste, which is part of how we fund administrative services within the department. And the last item, as I mentioned earlier, is the operating costs related to the new CAFO positions. Before moving on to grants. And as mentioned several times previously, the large driver of the change from FY 25 to 26 here is yet another increase in grants and loans due to bipartisan infrastructure law funds passing through our coffers. There's also some other minor changes, including several contracts and the Clean Water Fund pivoting to grants for the coming fiscal year. And some other minor changes across the department in grants.
Thank you. Wayne, did you have a question?
I have a question. It's probably more of a question for the secretary, but I was interested in employees, how many people are still working from home, or do you have a lot of them in back inside, and how happy are you with the results of that as a whole in terms of getting the work done? And I understand, a lot of this contract or a lot of these grants or whatever you do, a lot of the work could be done maybe from anywhere, but so any comment on that?
Sure. We have a pretty broad telework policy where employees are able to work essentially fully remotely if they desire, but need to be able to live within what we call the reasonable commuting distance, so that if they were asked to return to the office, they can return to the office. We have, I think, upwards of 3/4 of our staff, we have a telework agreement of some way, shape, or form. We also implemented a hotel desk policy, which says that if you're going to be in the office 3 or more days a week, you can have a dedicated desk. If not, we have an app and you can sign out a desk on that app. We did that in part because hiring all of these limited service positions, absent having a hotel desk policy, we would have actually had to add more rental space to meet our obligations under the collective bargaining agreement. So we have plenty of space. Frankly, the hotel app has allowed us also to accommodate requests from some sister agencies and partners, particularly that saw flood damage in 2023. We were able to identify pods of desks we can make available. USD Rural Development has been working out of our rented space in National Life. Green Mountain Care Board was with us for several months as their space was repaired. So it's had those kind of flex space benefits. I think there are challenges, and take seriously the results of the employee engagement survey around this remote posture. This year we've implemented a young professionals group, having heard from some of our most recent hires that they don't know a lot of people in the agency, and that becomes a barrier to attending all staff meetings or even a desire to come into the office occasionally. And I've seen significant interest in that. So it's, I would say it continues to be a work in progress. I think by and large, staff feel that our telework policy is a benefit. It's not without its challenges, and once we are continuing to work.
And part of it was asking for the budgetary consequences, because if other people are going to use your space, I assume that they're paying you for that, so that space charges are done. I'm asking in the context of how much space do we have and how much do we need? And, obviously, if we need only half as much office space as what we're using, then perhaps eventually we need to adjust the amount of space we have.
We are by and large in a 10-year commitment with National Life. We're in year 5 of the 10-year commitment, so there isn't a lot of opportunity to downsize. We have not charged partner sister agencies for our space. In some way, it would just be moving money from our right pocket to our left pocket, particularly in terms of the Green Mountain Care Board that didn't really have another place to go, yet their office space still remains on BGS's ledger. So we are always looking for opportunities to right size our footprint. Have made a couple of those changes. Commissioner Fitzko probably can speak to, because many of them have come from small satellite offices FPRs operated that just weren't being utilized. So as those leases come up, we do have an intentional conversation about each one of them to make a decision. But our biggest rent is at Nashville Life, and that is what it is until at least 2030.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Well, I think we're at the end of our time. So thank you very much for your presentation. And as you know, Trevor is your liaison committee and rest of the folks here. We're going to take about a 5-minute break, give everybody a chance to stretch, and then which one of you is up next? Whoever you would like, but I think it's Forest Parks and Rec is up next. So, all right, let's go off live there.
Thank you so much. Thank you.